Okay, well, welcome to the first part of the book of 1 Samuel. Are we excited?
Yay!
Good. But before we start, I would like to make a correction when we were reading the book of Judges. I had mentioned that judges, the word judges, was used to basically speak about that these men and women, because remember Deborah was a judge, that they were not judges in terms of judicial issues, but in terms of being rescuers and deliverers of the people of Israel from their enemies. Okay, that part is correct, but where I was incorrect was that they did do judicial issues. Why? Because they represented that Sanhedrin. There's always been a Sanhedrin in Israel from the moment that remember when Moses was dealing with all the issues with all the people, that he would sit and they would come and all day long, and then his father-in-law said, what you're doing is crazy. You're going to tire yourself. The people are going to get tired. Why don't you get other men to help you, men that are able to? And so they decided 70 men. God told Moses, choose 70 men, and you'll be over those 70 men. From those 70 men, I will take of your spirit and put upon them. Now, because of our Christian background, we think it's the Holy Spirit. It's not the Holy Spirit. The spirit that he's talking about of Moses is the discernment to interpret the Torah. Okay, to have discernment to interpret the Torah, because when people came to him, it was mostly issues about how to perform the commandments. Now, when you read the commandments in the Torah, does it tell you how to do them? No, it just mentions them to you. And then later on, when you read, I'm going to give you just the, if you're interested in looking it up, I'm just going to give you the references. So that way you can see where he talks about this. When he tells Moses of the 70 men that he chose, the Sanhedrin or the council or the assembly that has to do with dealings with the Torah, with the issues of explaining, interpreting the Torah according to the Lord, is an assembly, a group that God himself has given authority to these people to interpret the Torah. So when they interpret the Torah, they are interpreting it according to what God wants it to be. Okay, so that's been going on since that moment with Moses. The thing is that as time passes by, besides being called judges, they can be called elders, or they can be called the chiefs of the tribes, officers. So all those terms have to do with what we know as today as the Sanhedrin. Okay, the Sanhedrin is the body chosen by the Lord, starting with Moses, for they to be the people that would discern how to interpret the Torah. So you can find those references in Exodus chapter 18, verses 13 through 26. Exodus chapter 18, verses 13 through 26, that's when the Sanhedrin is established for the first time. Another reference is Numbers chapter 11, verses 24 through 29. Numbers chapter 11, verses 24 through 29. And in the chapter of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verses 18 through 17. Chapter 16, verse 18 through chapter 17, verse 13. Again, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 through chapter 17, verse 13. So where do we find all these rulings? One thing that Joseph Good was saying, that he and his wife did like a summary of the Mishnah. It turns out, this I did not know and I learned, and this is like an eye-opening thing. All these rulings, when they talk about rulings of the Torah, it's done by the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin, some say Sanhedrin, some Hedron. I put the Puerto Rican accent to it, Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin has the authority by the Lord to discern and interpret the Torah. Okay, so it's an authority given by God Himself. So what is the Mishnah? The Mishnah are the rulings that these men of the Sanhedrin have given since Moses until the Sanhedrin was disassembled. It happened I think in 398 BC. Or AC, or AD, whatever. Sometime. It was way after Yeshua, like in the so it has to be AD, right? CE, Common Era, 300 in the 350s. Basically after Babylon and all this thing and whatever. So the Mishnah are rulings on how to interpret, discern, and interpret the Torah. So everything they have said up to that point written in the Mishnah is authorized by God Himself. So when I was saying about Joseph Good and his wife did a summary of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is, if you buy the pocket size, it's like 40 books. If you buy the regular student size, it's like 21 books. And it's all the 613 commandments explained. So what I'm saying is, and they said to each other, when they were writing the summary of the Mishnah, they said to each other, if we find anything that's against the Torah, we're not going to follow that. They could not find one thing that is written in the Mishnah that goes against the Torah. Because they have been given authority by God to do rulings. Now, outside of that office and that position, they probably were scoundrels, because then the New Testament, the era of the writings, apostolic writings, a lot of them were not very nice people, or most of them were corrupt. But when they sat down to rule and interpret the Torah, they spoke what they had to speak. So that's why Yeshua said, "You do as they tell you to do, but don't do as they do," because what they spoke was correct, but they acted differently. So that's why Yeshua said, whatever they tell you to do, you do. When they're sitting in the seat of Moses, remember, sitting in the seat of Moses is to be in the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin was an area within a building that was right next to the temple. Within the temple court, there was a building, and these buildings, you know, that's another thing about the temple. When you listen to Joseph, you think that we have this idea that temple was a little bitty building. The temple itself, the sanctuary, which is the holy place and the Holy of Holies, it was at least minimum 8 feet tall. Some of the buildings were 100 feet tall. Not 8 feet, 8 stories, 8 stories high. 100 feet, I don't know. Numbers, I'm not good at numbers, but it was huge. So in one of those buildings, they had the Sanhedrin. So whatever that came out of their mouth as a ruling was according to the authority of the Lord. So that's why Yeshua said, do as they say, but don't do as they do. Okay? So again, when we were reading the Judges, they were the Sanhedrin. Deborah was part of that Sanhedrin system. So she sat, when they say she sat under that tree, she was doing exactly the same thing that Moses was doing. She was judging in the sense of discerning and interpreting the issues of the Torah, of commandments. Now the Sanhedrin had 3 divisions. You had a group that represented all the issues related to the priesthood. You had another division that interpreted all the issues with the Levites. And then you had another group that interpreted all the issues was the Israelites. So you had priests, Levites, and Israelites, and all those made part of the Sanhedrin. And in Jerusalem, there were 71 men within the Sanhedrin. Okay, so the leader or the Nasi was like the president, and then the Av Beit Din, the father of the house of judgment, was like the vice president. And so all these men were responsible for interpreting the Torah. So the book of Judges, from Moses on, anytime they mention judges, officers, elders, or chief or tribal chiefs, they're part of the Sanhedrin. Okay? I just wanted to clarify that because when I mentioned judges, I was wrong. I was incorrect because I was informed incorrectly. But now I know better. So was Samson. Samson was a judge. He was part of the Sanhedrin. All these men and women that we talked about when we read the Judges, they did all the same thing. They interpreted the Torah for the people. Okay. So let's start with Samuel. Samuel is an interesting book. Chapter 1 of Samuel says the following. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim, Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim. Remember, we've been dealing with Ephraim since we started with the book of Judges. And his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and Ephraimite. So we know they are all from Ephraim. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So right there you're going, 2 wives? What does this mean? Well, they mentioned Hannah first, so most likely she was his first wife. But Hannah was barren, and according to the culture, remember like Abraham and Sarah, she couldn't have children. The law of where they lived allowed a man to have a second wife if the first one could not give them children. So the children of the second wife would be basically corresponding to the first wife. So we have Hannah, and Hannah had no children. She was sterile. But Peninnah had children. So it says that now this man, verse 3, would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh or in Shiloh. Why would he go yearly? The pilgrimage feast, which are Passover, Shavuot, and Tabernacle. So he was faithful to go because they're commanded to go to bring your offerings to the Lord. In this case, remember that once they came from the Exodus and they conquered the land, in Shechem, in Shiloh, they put the tabernacle. Okay, so for once they conquered the land, Shiloh became the place of worship where the tabernacle was. So that's why he went up to Shiloh every year. And it says, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, were priests to the Lord there. So Eli has 2 sons. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. It's interesting that every time the Lord is going to uplift a very special person, they're usually born from someone that can't have a child, to show that it is the Lord that's doing the miracle and that he gets the glory. So remember, he loves Hannah more than he loves Peninnah, so he gives her double portions every time they... And of course, if they're eating of the sacrifice, what kind of sacrifice were they offering? The Shelamim offering, the peace offering. It's the only offering that you can eat with your family. So he came and did peace offerings to the Lord, and he shared that with his family. Verse 6, her rival, the other woman, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So here we have kind of like the issue with Abraham and Hagar. Hagar was, once she had Ishmael, she treated Sarah like, she just despised her. And so now the other one who's having all these kids, and Hannah hasn't had any children, she despises her. She's being really, really bad to her. Verse 7, it happened year after year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep and why do you not eat, and why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Remember that the doorpost is the threshold of the tabernacle. Okay, so he's sitting there, Eli, he's the priest, most likely the high priest. And it says, she, referring to Hannah, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. So she makes a vow. Remember that vows during this time were huge. You always did what you promised, what you vowed. And she's vowing, if you give me a son, I promise that I will give him back to you to serve in the temple, and in this case, in the tabernacle. And that he will, it says, a razor shall never come on his head. In other words, he will be a Nazirite because of the Nazirite vow. Not from Nazareth, but a Nazirite has to do with being separated, being consecrated. Verse 12, now it came about as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, and only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. My mom used to say, well, there's a saying, un pillo juzga por su condición. To translate to my non-Spanish speaking, the lion? Okay, it's like in Spanish, is the thief judges by his character, so he thinks everybody else is a thief. So Eli thinks she's drunk. Most likely they used to, and we'll see all this stuff that was going on with Eli and his sons, okay? So it says, so he thinks she's drunk. Verse 14, then Eli said to her, how long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah replied, no, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now out of my great concern and provocation. Then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you have asked of him. She said, let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So she trusted that word that came from Eli. Why? Because he's the priest. Okay, even though we'll see they weren't doing things they were supposed to, but still, the Lord honored his office as priest. Not him, but his office. Okay, because you can be in a position, and the position is what has value, because sometimes you have people in office for whatever reason, they're not the best people. Verse 19, then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord and returned again to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah had relations with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. It came about in due time, after Hannah had conceived, that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. In other words, Shemuel, which means from Shema, from hearing, from listening, because the Lord listened to her prayer, she got Samuel, which is Shemuel. Okay? Now it says, Then the man Elkanah went up with all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. So she's taking care of little Samuel until he's old enough to take him to the temple or to the tabernacle, until he's weaned. And usually it was at least a minimum of 3 years. Okay, remember Moses, that his mom took care of him until he was weaned and then brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter? The same thing was little Samuel. Verse 23, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best to you. Remain until you have weaned him, only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, although the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. She said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition which I asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. So when she brings the bull and she brings his offerings, it's offerings of gratitude, of thanksgiving, and of dedicating little Samuel to the tabernacle. So she hands him over to Eli. Why? Because that was the promise she gave to the Lord. Now the thing is, you're going to say, well, how can she do that? Well, remember they went every year to celebrate, so she saw him every year. It's not like she never saw him again. Okay? Now, the prayer of Hannah is one of the most beautiful prayers you can read in the Bible. In chapter 2, it says, Then Hannah prayed and said, My heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is no one besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. Boast no more so very proudly. Do not let arrogance come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and with him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are shattered, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry ceased to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low. He also exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with nobles and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he set the world on them. He keeps the feet of his godly ones, but the wicked ones are silenced in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. Those who contend with the Lord will be shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king, and will exalt the horn of his anointed. Then Elkanah went to his home at Ramah, but the boy ministered to the Lord before Eli the priest. So when she's speaking, remember she was barren. She has the son, but she says now there are 7 sons. And as we'll read further, she had 6 children. So who's the 7th child? Hmm? No, Samuel's already counted in the 6. Who's the 7th? She's talking about a king. It's the future Messiah.
David.
Or David. It has to do with the Messiah, the line of Messiah. It could be David, it could be Messiah. So it has to do with the kingship line. And remember, the kingship lines comes through David all the way down to Yeshua. So that's the number 7 in reference to, remember, 7 has to do with temple. Who's going to be in the temple? The king is going to be in the temple. That's why kingship language is all around when you read the Bible. Now verse 12, listen to this, how they talk about Eli and his sons. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Here they are, priests, ministering in the tabernacle, but they did not know the Lord. They had no relationship was Adonai. And the custom of the priest was the people. When any man was offering a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling with a 3-pronged fork in his hand. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. Thus they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. In other words, you remember that when we read in Leviticus, certain parts of the offerings had to be given to the Lord. They had to be, and usually there were, some parts were given to the priest depending on what type of offering, but other parts had to be divided, cut up, and offered to the Lord. So before all this was offered, the priests would send their servants and say, go and get the best. So they would go into the pot and take the choicest pieces of meat. So they would do this with the offerings of the people when those offerings were meant for them. Not only that, in verse 16 it says, if the man also before they burned the fat, the priest servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, give the priest meat for roasting, as he will not take boiled meat from you, only raw. If the man said to him, they must surely burn the fat first, and then take as much as you desire, then he would say no. So the people knew how to offer these things, but they ignored the law. They ignored the law of the offerings, the sons of Eli, and they said, no, but you shall give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Thus the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for the men despised the offering of the Lord. They're serving as priests. They're in the tabernacle where the presence of the Lord is, and they're doing whatever they want, however they want. All they wanted to do was eat the best that the people brought. Because remember that the people would always bring the best they had to offer to the Lord, so they would come and take it. I mean, completely despising that this belonged to the Lord. Now, verse 18, now Samuel was ministering before the Lord as a boy wearing a linen ephod. And his mother would make him a little robe and bring it to him from year to year when she would come up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, may the Lord give you children from this woman in place of the one she dedicated to the Lord. And they went to their own home. The Lord visited Hannah. It's interesting, the word visited is pakad. Pakad in Hebrew, and we always think, we were studying this in my Hebrew class today. Pakad is translated as visit. And usually when you talk about visiting someone, you think it's, visiting, I go to your house, have a cup of coffee and whatever. The word pakad in Hebrew means taking care of. The Lord came and he wants to see, what are your needs? How can I serve you? How can I take care of you? What's going on in your life? So when it says that God visited Hannah, it's not saying that he sat down with her to have a cup of tea. He went there to see what she needs, how to take care of her needs. So that's what visiting means. Now, for me, that changed completely the interpretation of when in Exodus it says that God visited the children of Israel. It wasn't he came to say hi and have a cup of wine with them. So it says, verse 21, the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. 5. Remember 5, it has to do with kingdom, the kingdom of Messiah. 5 plus Samuel is 6. So when she talks about having had 7 children, 7 has to do with kingship. Verse 22, now Eli was very old, and he heard all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Now remember that with the Lord there's no women serving as priests, but most likely these were women that were taking care of the needs of them in terms of, their clothing or whatever. And these guys, when these women came, they would go and have sex with them. He said to them, and so Eli is telling his sons, why do you do such things, the evil things that I hear from all these people? No, my sons, for the report is not good which I hear the Lord's people circulating. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for the Lord desired to put him to death. So because of what they're doing, remember, anytime you go against the Lord himself, you're committing ma'al. And what is the punishment for ma'al? Death. So already the Lord is thinking, oh, you guys are gone. He's going to kill them for what they're doing. Now, verse 26, it says, now the boy Samuel was growing in stature and in favor both with the Lord and with men. Then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, in other words, a prophet, thus says the Lord, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage to Pharaoh's house? So what's the house of Eli? The Levites. He's a Levite. He's a priest from the Levite. Did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Why do you kick at my sacrifice and at my offering which I have commanded in my dwelling? My dwelling is the tabernacle. In the future is the temple, is the place of his presence. And honor your sons above me. So Eli, all he did was kind of like scold his sons, but he didn't really do anything to make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to. So God sees that he's giving more favor to his sons than to God himself. So he says, by making yourselves fat with the choicest of every offering of my people Israel. Therefore the Lord God of Israel declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will break your strength and the strength of your father's house, so there will not be an old man in your house. You will see the distress of my dwelling, in spite of all the good that I do for Israel. And an old man will not be in your house forever. Yet I will not cut off every man of yours from my altar, so that your eyes will fail from weeping and your soul grieve, and all the increase of your house will die in the prime of life. This will be the sign to you which you will come concerning your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas. On the same day both of them will die. But I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and in my soul, and I will build him an enduring house, and he will walk before my anointed always. Everyone who is left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread and say, please assign me to the one of the priest's offices so that I may eat a piece of bread. In other words, the descendants of Eli, they wouldn't grow to be old men. They would die young. Why? Because of all the evil that they were doing. So the curse is going to fall upon the descendants for all the evil they did, all the ma'al they did against the Lord. But the Lord says, but still, I will prepare a faithful priest, someone that will do according to my heart and my soul. And so in chapter 3, we have when Samuel is sleeping, it says, now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli, and word from the Lord was rare in those days. Visions weren't frequent. In other words, the prophecies, and the Lord didn't really speak that much to the people because it wasn't worth his time. And it says, it happened at that time as Eli was lying down in his place. Now his eyesight had begun to grow dim, and he could not see well. And the lamp of God had not yet gone out. What is the lamp of God? The menorah. Okay, the menorah. Remember, they were all living next to where the tabernacle is, in Shiloh. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was, that the Lord called Samuel, and he said, here I am. So where is Samuel? Samuel is not in the Holy of Holies. Remember, they're mentioning the menorah, And then they're mentioning that he was in the temple of the Lord. He's in the holy place. Okay, so little Samuel was sleeping in the holy place. And he hears the Lord calls him. And he says, here I am. And he goes to Eli thinking that Eli called him. And Eli said, no, go to bed. I didn't call you. It's too late. So he goes back to bed. And then again he calls him, Samuel, Samuel. He gets up. He goes to Eli. Here I am. What you want? I didn't call you. Go back to bed. So he goes. The third time, since this is happening already, this is the third time, little Samuel goes to Eli. And now Eli, probably wakened from so many times, now he really understands this is God who's talking to you. So he says, go back. And when he calls you again, answer this way. Verse 10 of chapter 3. Then the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. The Lord said to Samuel, behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. In that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse up themselves, and he did not rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. I mean, that would have put me on my knees and my face like that. But remember, he's telling Samuel what he's going to do with Eli. He's saying there's no atonement for the house of Eli. That's big. That's huge. So Samuel lay down until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, the tabernacle. But Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he said, here I am. He said, what is the word that he spoke to you? Please do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you. In other words, Samuel, if you don't tell me, you're going to receive the same thing that he said to you. Remember, he's a priest. He's the high priest. And even though he's not the best of the best, his office is position. So when he's telling Samuel to tell him, so Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, it is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. Verse 19. The Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fail. All Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, because the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. In other words, remember where it says that they hadn't received word from God, and it was rare? But with Samuel, the presence of the Lord again was being seen and heard. And so as Samuel grew, people understood he's not like Eli. He's not like his sons. This guy is really a true prophet chosen by God. Now in chapter 4 it says that the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle. So here's the issue with the Philistines. And the Philistines defeat the people of Israel. And everybody's kind of, the first time, 4,000 men of Israel fall to the Philistines. And so all the elders of Israel gather together. Do you remember the elders are? The judges, the Sanhedrin, to decide what to do. And so they decide in verse 3, towards the middle, it says, let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sits above the cherubim, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. So in spite of Here these two guys are carrying the covenant, the ark. Because they said, let's take the ark with us because we're being beat by the Philistines. Maybe this will help us to beat them instead. So it says in verse 5, as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted. It was a great shout so that the earth resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, what does the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean? Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. The Philistines were afraid, for they said, God has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who shall deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who smote the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, or you will become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been slaves to you. Therefore be men and fight. So they know about the Ark of the Covenant. They know about the God of Israel. They know about this God did to the Egyptians, above all the plagues. So the thing, it's okay. So the thing is that they know what's going on, but when they say the gods of the Israelites, remember that they're not referring only to God Yahweh, but to the people. They were also considered gods because they were able to defeat the Egyptians and do all these things. So when they know that the ark is coming, they're like, oh my goodness, now we're really going to get beat. So they go back in battle, and it says, I lost my place. Okay. Verse 10 of chapter 4. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent, and the slaughter was very great. For there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers, and the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, died. Now it says, now a man of Benjamin, of the tribe of Benjamin, ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and dust on his head. Why? Because he's mourning. Because the ark is taken. When he came, behold, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, eagerly watching, because his heart was trembling for the ark of God. So the man came to tell it in the city, and all the city cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, what does the noise of this commotion mean? Then the man came hurriedly and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. The man said to Eli, I am the one who came from the battle line. Indeed, I escaped from the battle line today. And he said, how did things go, my son? Then the one who brought the news replied, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great slaughter among the people, and your two sons also, Hophni and Pinchas, are dead, and the ark of God has been taken. When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell off the seat backward beside the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For he was old and heavy, thus he judged Israel 40 years. So his thing wasn't so much that his sons died when the ark was taken. Remember, this is the Ark of the Covenant. This is the throne of God Almighty that was sitting within the tabernacle. So he knew his sons already were destined to death because the Lord told him. But that the ark is taken by his enemies, uncircumcised men. So he got so agitated that he fell from his seat and broke his neck. So not only did his two sons die the same day, he also died. And it says he was heavy. Why? Because they ate all the best of the offerings that was to the Lord instead of to themselves. So he's fussing about his sons, but he was participating of the same thing. So what do we have? I like the story about the Philistines and their God. It says, now chapter 5, now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. Who's Dagon? Their God. Why? Because it was the custom that if you defeated your enemy, you took whatever was theirs, especially the throne, and bring it to the house of your God to show that your God was stronger than their God, to shame the God of Israel. And Dagon, it used to be thought, there's a controversy that Dagon means god of fish, or that Dagon means god of grain. That has to do with the grains, with nature. And it says, then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. When the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in his place again. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Therefore neither the priest of Dagon nor all who entered Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. So what do we have here? That image, his head was cut off, his hands was cut off, and it all fell down at the threshold of the temple of Dagon. And remember, threshold has to do with covenant. So what is God Almighty saying? There's no other God but me, and covenant is with me. Because the enemies, the custom to the enemies was to cut off their hands and their heads. So the Lord does the same thing to the image. So can you imagine? They come in and they see their image, there's God all messed up, and nobody else is in the temple. I mean, God has this nice sense of humor. So verse 6, now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories. When the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, let the ark of God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of God of Israel around. After they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city with very great confusion. And he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. And as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought the ark of the God of Israel around us to kill us and our people. They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, so that it will not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city. The hand of God was very heavy there, and the men who did not die were smitten with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So the people are getting tumors and plagues, and everybody's dying, so everybody's afraid. So what they do, they pass the ark down to different cities to see, if they get relieved. A hot potato, but they keep getting, because the ark is not supposed to be there. Besides, they're uncircumcised people. They have no dealings with the God of Israel. Chapter 6. Now the ark of the Lord had been in the country of the Philistines 7 months. 7 has to do with temple, with kingdom. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we shall send it to its place. They said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty. Even they knew and understood tribute to the king. But you shall surely return to him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then they said, what shall be the guilt offering which we shall return to him? And they said, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for one plague was on all of you and on all your lords. So you shall make likenesses of your tumors and likenesses of your mice that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will ease his hand from you, your gods and your land. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he had severely dealt with them, did they not allow the people to go, and they departed? Now therefore take and prepare a new cart and 2 milch cows on which there has never been a yoke, and hitch the cows to the cart and take their calves home away from them. Take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put the articles of gold which you return to him as a guilt offering in a box by its side. then send it away that it may go. Watch if it goes up the way of its own territory to Beth Shemesh. Shemesh means sun. Then he has done us this great evil. But if not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. So they prepare a brand new cart. They take 2 cows that have calves. Now you know, if you've ever been in a farm and you have cows and they've had baby calves, that they're nursing. It's very hard to separate a mommy cow from her baby cow. So they're doing all these things to see if it's truly the hand of the God of Israel that's against them. Because it's not the normal thing to take a nursing cow from her calf. So they take 2 cows in a cart that has never been used, because they understand the rituals of unclean and clean and purity and impure. So they're taking this and offering to the God of Israel, hoping that this will help him appease his anger with them. And they say, if the cows on their own, they decide to go the way of the sun, of Beth Shemesh, sun, S-U-N, and if all this happens, let's put also inside the cart images or likeness of the tumors that we're all having, of mice. So most likely, if it were mice and they had tumors and they were dying, most likely it was bubonic plague. Okay, you know, bubonic plague forms these kind of tumors. When I say tumor, it's not tumor like a cancer, but tumor is anything that's bulging. Okay, the word tumor means anything that bulges. So they're being plagued by mice, rats. And so they got all this stuff going on. And so let's say, well, let's see if this helps. We'll make something that looks the same as what we have, all these diseases and all these things, and maybe that will help to appease the God of Israel. That's the way they thought. Verse 10, then the men did so and took 2 milch cows and hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box with the golden mice and the likenesses of their tumors. And the cows took the straight way in the direction of Beth Shemesh. They went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. So if they're reaping wheat, what time of season? Shavuot. And they raised their eyes and saw the ark and were glad to see it. The cart came into the field of Yeshua the Beth Shemite and stood there where there was a large stone. All these words are referring, stone refers to Yeshua, the wheat harvest. All these things are references to kingship, to Yeshua, the future the Messiah. It says, and there was a large stone, and they split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. Why? Because the ark had returned. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was with it, in which were the articles of gold, and put them on the large stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices that day to the Lord. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned to Ekron that day. In other words, saying, phew, we did it. We did it. And so we really know that it was the God of Israel against us. And it says, verse 17, these are the golden tumors which the Philistines returned for a guilt offering to the Lord. 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, 1 for Gath, 1 for Ekron. And the golden mice according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both of fortified cities and of country villages. The large stone on which they set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua the Beth Shemite. He struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. So, I mean, here's the ark. Nobody's ever seen the ark. It's brought to Beth Shemesh. And these guys, some of the guys in the village, they wanted to see what the ark looked like. Most likely it was covered, because you could never take the ark out of the Holy of Holies without being covered, because no one was supposed to look at it. The only person is the high priest once a year. So the guys that live in the city, they want to see so they peek And they're gone. It says he struck down some of the men of Bethshemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck down of all the people 50,070 men. And the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. The men of Bethshemesh said, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up from us? So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Yeraim, saying, the Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up with you. Because they're saying, we too are being slaughtered. So everybody wanted to know what was in the ark, what it looked like. So every time they peeked, have you ever seen the movie of Indiana Jones? When they opened the ark, and Indiana says to his girlfriend on a pole, he says, don't look, don't look, don't look. And when they opened, what happened to the people that were around the ark? Poof! I mean, this is the most holiest article within the temple, the tabernacle. It is the throne of God. It is part of the temple. And if he did that to them, don't you think that today people that are against the temple, people that are against the things that have been established from creation, from Genesis 1:1, people that go against, speaking against the priesthood, speaking against the temple, speaking against all these things, the offerings, the sacrifices, is ma'al. It's no different than these people that looked into the ark. It's no different than anybody that tries to go against. It's always, if you're doing something directly against our heavenly King, it is ma'al. So every time, that's why I'm saying, if you have a chance to go to these temple conferences, you have to go. The temple is basic. The temple, when you look at a Torah scroll, there's a big bet. House. What house? The temple. It's his dwelling place, the place that he's chosen to be with us, to dwell with us, and not only dwell with us, dwell in us. That's why Yeshua is Emmanuel, and Emmanuel is Yeshua. Okay? So that's the first 6 chapters of Samuel. So let's take a time for questions and answers.